about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision. It's almost like engineering, really.
Right, yeah, like a totally binary system.
Yeah.
Broken or not broken, infected or clear.
Exactly. Like you fall, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is, there's the problem.
And it's clean.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's comforting.
It is. We naturally like things to be visible. We want them to be physical and easily categorized into a neat little treatment plan. But then you step into the world of holistic therapies and vibrational healing, and well, suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
Yeah, totally useless. Because the diagnostic landscape we're looking at today, it isn't about identifying a broken bone. It's about mapping this entirely invisible energetic structure.
Right, which is a massive paradigm shift in how we view the human body. So if you're joining us for this deep dive, you likely already have some interest in conscious living. Maybe you practice yoga or you meditate, or maybe you just keep a piece of amethyst on your desk.
Or perhaps you've tried a holistic remedy when you were feeling the rundown.
Exactly. But our mission today is to really decode the actual underlying mechanics of how these nature energies are supposed to work. We've got this fascinating stack of source texts detailing the properties of flower essences, gem elixirs, and herbs.
But I mean, we aren't here to just list off what you should take for a headache.
Yeah.
We really want to understand the why and the how, moving past the buzzwords.
Right. We want to shortcut that journey to being genuinely well-informed. We're going to explore the arguments these texts make about how natural remedies interact with both our physical biology and our subtle energetic bodies. So let's jump right into the physics of it, or, well, the physics as argued by these sources.
Yeah, because before we even talk about a specific flower or a crystal, we absolutely have to understand the human body the way vibrational medicine sees it.
Which is to say, not as a chemical machine, right?
Exactly. The fundamental rule in these texts is that we are an energy matrix. That is the foundational concept that everything else we're going to talk about builds upon.
And it's not a new concept, is it?
Oh, not at all. The texts draw on these ancient spiritual philosophies, like the Vedas and Kashmir Shaivism, which have long argued that matter is essentially just crystallized spirit, or, highly condensed energy.
Right, and the authors point out that modern quantum physics is actually starting to validate this ancient idea, which is pretty wild.
It is. The whole premise is that all creation, including the dense physical material of the human body, is just different levels of vibrating energy.
So if we accept that premise for a moment, it completely changes our understanding of illness. I mean, a disease doesn't just randomly appear in your physical tissue out of nowhere. It's not like a light switch just flipping off.
No, not at all. According to this framework, illness always begins as an imbalance in what they call the subtle bodies, or even within your actual consciousness.
Wow, so the physical body, the organs, the tissue, the blood, that's just the end of the line?
Yes, the physical body is actually the very last place a disease shows up. It is the end result of a long, energetic chain reaction.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, treating just the physical symptom with, like, a conventional pill, it's kind of like turning off a blaring fire alarm without actually putting out the fire in the kitchen?
That is a perfect analogy, yes.
Mhm.
You silence the alarm. You might even completely suppress the physical symptom, but the destructive energetic force that started the fire, that's still burning in the background.
Because it hasn't been resolved on an energetic level? Okay, I love the kitchen fire analogy, but I do have to push back here a bit because this is where, a lot of people get tripped up by holistic medicine. I get the idea of an energy matrix, but how does taking a literal liquid drop of water that's been infused with a flower actually put out the fire of a complex physical disease?
Right, it sounds a bit out there.
Yeah, I mean, structurally, it just sounds like magic to a lot of people.
Well, the texts are absolutely adamant that it isn't magic. They argue it is a highly specific mechanism, and they call it sympathetic resonancy.
Sympathetic resonancy. Okay, break that down for us.
So to understand this, you have to picture the body as a symphony of frequencies. Every single organ, every cell, has this ideal frequency when it's healthy.
Okay.
When a human gets sick, the text suggests their biomolecular pattern becomes unstable. It gets out of tune.
Like a guitar string that's lost its tension and is just vibrating erratically and making this terrible sound.
That's exactly it. Now, vibrational remedies, like a flower essence, are said to carry a highly stable, harmonious, and very specific geometric pattern of energy.
And so you put that into the chaotic system.
Right. When you introduce that stable remedy into the unstable human system, it doesn't chemically force the body to change. Instead, the stable pitch of the remedy begins to resonate.
Oh, I see.
And through sympathetic resonancy, the chaotic, unstable human molecular activity begins to naturally mimic and entrain with that stable pattern.
Wait, entrain? Like how pendulum clocks on a wall will eventually synchronize their swings to match each other if they're in the same room?
Precisely. The stronger, more stable frequency of the remedy essentially pulls the erratic human frequency back into alignment.
That is fascinating.
It really is. It stabilizes the energy matrix first, up in those subtle bodies, and then the texts argue that this newly restored stability eventually trickles down through the cellular level to actually heal the physical organs.
Wow, so you aren't attacking the disease at all. You are just tuning the body back to a frequency where the disease basically can't exist.
That's exactly the argument, yeah.
Okay, so if true healing requires fixing the root consciousness that caused that erratic vibration to begin with, then we need to look at the remedies that supposedly hold the highest concentration of consciousness. And looking at our stack of sources, there is a very clear hierarchy here.
Oh, definitely. The undisputed heavy hitters are flower essences.
Right. The texts argue that because flowers represent the absolute most concentrated area of life force in a plant-like, it's a culmination of its growth and reproductive energy, the essences made from them contain this profound evolutionary force.
Yeah, and there's a specific phrase in the text that really caught my eye on this. The author describes flower essences as tinctures of liquid consciousness.
Tinctures of liquid consciousness. It's such a vivid description.
It is, and it highlights a really crucial distinction the texts make between flower essences and something more familiar to people, like traditional homeopathy.
Let's unpack that, actually, because I think a lot of people just use those terms interchangeably. Like they think it's all just tiny drops in a bottle. How does a flower essence differ from a homeopathic remedy?
Well, according to the sources, traditional homeopathy usually utilizes denser, sometimes even inorganic materials.
Okay.
The mechanism of homeopathy, at least as argued in this framework, is often to vibrationally duplicate the physical disease itself. And it does that in order to push the imbalance out of the physical body. So it functions very much on the molecular physical level.
But flower essences are operating somewhere else entirely.
Yes, they are operating much higher up the energetic chain, so to speak. Rather than just mirroring the physical disease to push it out, flower essences are said to adjust the actual flow of consciousness and karma that created the disease state to begin with.
Oh, wow. So they work exclusively on the subtle bodies and the ethereal properties first?
Precisely.
So they're going straight to the kitchen fire, completely bypassing the alarm bell.
Exactly. And this leads to another major concept in the texts. They talk about how flower essences have the unique ability to weaken deep-seated genetic and energetic diseases.
Right, which the esoteric traditions call miasms. Let's stop right there, actually. What exactly is a miasm? We should probably define that for everyone.
Sure. So in this framework, a miasm is essentially a deep karmic or genetic imprint of a disease.
Like a stain.
Yeah, exactly, like an energetic stain.
Yeah.
It's a predisposition that you carry in your subtle bodies, which might eventually manifest as a physical illness down the line.
Okay, so the argument is that while traditional medicine might cure the physical illness when it pops up, the miasm, the underlying energetic stain, it remains.
Right. But flower essences are claimed to clear the mind and the subtle bodies, effectively bleaching out that stain, so the miasm is eliminated from the genetic code entirely.
Okay, that is a massive claim. But, here's the part of the text that I really struggle to wrap my head around.
Which part?
Well, how exactly do you capture a flower's consciousness or its etheric imprint in a bottle? Because you aren't just blending up petals and stems in a food processor to extract vitamins, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
You don't let the physical plant matter. The preparation process described in the texts is called the sun method.
Right.
It is beautiful in its simplicity, but the underlying theory is quite complex. Basically, you take freshly picked blooms, right at the absolute height of their vitality, and you float them on the surface of a glass bowl filled with pure distilled water.
And this has to be done outside, right? Under a cloudless sky.
Yes, typically early in the morning, the flowers are left there to be exposed to the pranic forces of the sun.
Pranic meaning life force.
Correct. Prana is the vital, life-sustaining energy in the universe. The texts argue that the sun's rays act almost like a photographic flash.
A flash? How so?
Well, the sun supposedly melts the life force and the specific structural geometry of the flower's etheric body directly into the molecular structure of the water.
See, this is exactly where I need to ask for clarity. Because when this process is over, they remove the physical flowers from the bowl. Absolutely no physical plant material ends up in the final liquid.
Right, it's just water.
Yeah. If you sent that water to a traditional lab, they wouldn't find a single biochemical trace of the plant. So how does the text explain the water actually retaining anything?
So the authors argue for a concept that's very similar to water memory. They claim that water, especially pure distilled water, is a highly receptive medium.
Meaning it can hold a shape.
Yes, exactly. They argue it can structurally organize itself to hold an energetic frequency. They even point to Kirlian photography as proof.
Which is that technique used to capture electrical coronal discharges, right?
hmm
What some people call energy fields.
Exactly. The texts claim that if you were to take a Kirlian photograph of this water immediately after removing the physical flower, you would actually see a ghost-like geometric imprint of the flower glowing right within the water.
That is wild. So the argument is that you are ingesting the invisible structural intelligence of the plant, not its chemistry.
That's it. You were drinking the energetic blueprint of the flower.
Okay, well, if we accept that water can hold a vibration just by floating a flower in it, what happens when we introduce something incredibly dense and permanent into the mix? Like, where do physical supplements like gemstones, crystals, or even herbs fit into this hierarchy?
Well, the sources outline a very specific spectrum of healing. If flower essences are at the very top, working purely on consciousness, then gemstones and gem elixirs occupy the middle ground.
Okay, so they function basically right between flower essences and homeopathic remedies.
Exactly.
But what does that mean practically for the person taking them?
Because gems are denser than flowers, the texts argue they have a stronger, more immediate impact on the physical body's ethereal fluidium.
Another great esoteric term, ethereal fluidium. What exactly is that?
It refers to the subtle energy currents that interpenetrate and flow through the physical fluids of our body. So, like our blood, our lymph system, our cellular water, gem elixirs supposedly target these fluid systems directly.
All right, well, I have to play the skeptic again here, and I'm really going to dig my heels in on this one.
Go for it.
The texts say that flowers hold consciousness because they are alive. You know, they grow, they reproduce, they have a life cycle. A piece of quartz is a rock. It is completely inanimate. So how can the text possibly argue that a rock has a healing consciousness?
That is an excellent point, and the texts actually agree with your skepticism.
Really?
Yes, they draw a very clear distinction here. Gems are inanimate. They do not possess consciousness or a life force in the way a living flower does.
And what are they doing? Why use them?
The texts describe gems primarily as incredibly powerful amplifiers and resonators. And the reason they supposedly work so well on humans is based on this fascinating biological argument. They claim the human body actually contains internal crystalline structures.
Wait. We have crystals inside of us. Like biologically.
Yes, on a microscopic level. The texts point out that we have quartz-like crystalline properties in our bones, in our lymph nodes, in our cell salts, and particularly concentrated within the pineal gland in the brain.
Okay, so we're essentially walking crystal networks.
According to this framework, yes. And because we possess these internal crystalline structures, there is a natural sympathetic resonancy between the human body and external gemstones.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right, so when you ingest a gem elixir, or even just place a specific crystal on your body, the gemstone doesn't give you its consciousness. Instead, it acts as a relay point.
Like a radio tuner.
Exactly like a radio tuner. Think about a crystal in a radio. It resonates with an invisible high-frequency radio wave, absorbs it, and translates it into audio you can hear.
Wow.
The texts argue that gem elixirs do the same thing. They absorb subtle, high-frequency cosmic energies, amplify them, and focus them deep into the body's biomolecular level.
So your internal crystalline structures can actually recognize and use that energy.
Exactly. They are the bridge between the cosmic and the physical.
The gem is the bridge. Okay, that actually makes logical sense within the rules of this framework, but what about herbs?
Herbs.
Yeah, because herbs are entirely physical. I mean, you eat them, you make teas out of them, they have actual measurable vitamins and chemical compounds. Do they even belong in vibrational medicine?
They absolutely do.
Mm-hmm.
Herbs represent the densest, most physical end of this particular spectrum.
Okay.
The texts acknowledge that herbs provide necessary physical nutrients, and their biochemical properties actively repel invading toxins and, or soothe physical tissues. But, and this is the key to vibrational medicine, the sources note that herbs also deliver a spiritual message.
A spiritual message from a plant leaf. How does that work?
Well, the authors introduced the concept of a morphogenetic field. In plain English, this is an invisible energetic blueprint, or a structural field, that dictates how a living thing grows and forms.
So every single herb has its own unique energetic blueprint.
Correct. And taking an herb physically, according to the text, is actually a way of showing you where you are spiritually out of harmony.
Interesting.
The herb's morphogenetic field interacts with your energy matrix and issues a sort of telepathic challenge.
Okay, give me a practical example of how a telepathic challenge from an herb actually plays out in a sick person, because that sounds intense.
Let's say you are suffering from chronic throat problems. A holistic practitioner gives you a specific herb to treat it. Physically, the chemical compounds in the herb are bringing nutrients, they're reducing inflammation, soothing your throat tissue.
Right, the normal medical stuff.
Exactly. But energetically, the herb's morphogenetic field is interacting with your throat chakra, which is your center of communication. It is subtly challenging you, asking, are you in harmony with how you are using your voice? Are you suppressing your truth?
Wow. So the physical symptom, the sore throat, is really just the alarm bell ringing.
Yeah.
And the physical herb acts as the water to put out the immediate tissue fire, but its energetic field basically sits you down and asks, hey, why did you start this fire in the first place? Are you swallowing your words at work? Are you afraid to speak up in your relationship?
Exactly. The herb provides the physical scaffolding for healing, but it forces behavioral illumination. The texts argue that true healing only happens when you finally acknowledge the negative thought form that allowed the disease to manifest in your physical tissue to begin with.
Reading through these texts and seeing how intricately they layer the physical and the energetic, it just becomes incredibly clear that this sophisticated spectrum, using flowers for pure consciousness, gems for amplification, herbs for behavioral harmony, this isn't just some 21st century wellness trend.
No, it's far older than that.
Right, and this is where the texts take a massive leap that I really want to talk about, because they trace this entire science back to ancient civilizations, specifically Lemuria and Atlantis.
Yes, the texts dive quite deeply into the histories of Lemuria and Atlantis as the true origin points for vibrational medicine.
Okay, wait. Lemuria and Atlantis, like the mythical lost continents. How do these botanical therapeutic texts suddenly jump into what, frankly, most people consider sci-fi mythology?
It's definitely a jarring shift for a modern reader, absolutely. But within esoteric traditions, these are considered actual epochs of human history.
Fair enough.
However, the authors use them to illustrate a crucial underlying point about human evolution and our changing relationship with nature, regardless of whether you view them as literal historical periods or just powerful archetypal myths.
Okay, let's look at the argument they're making, though. What exactly is the Lemurian ideal?
So, the texts describe the Lemurian culture as a civilization that lived in total unbroken harmony with the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields.
Okay.
Their intuitive and spiritual states of consciousness were highly developed. They were deeply, deeply connected to the planet. And because of this profound alignment, the texts claim that disease was practically unknown to them.
Wait, so if nobody was getting sick, why did they even need flower essences or gem elixirs?
Well, they didn't use them to cure illnesses. According to the sources, Lemurians used these vibrational frequencies purely for spiritual acceleration.
Oh, to enhance telepathy and things like that?
Yes, and to facilitate the continuous regeneration of their physical body tissue. Their environment was just a baseline of total balance.
So they were basically living in the ultimate continuous preventative wellness state.
Exact.
But then the texts contrast them with Atlantis. And reading the description of Atlantis in these sources, it sounds uncomfortably familiar.
It really does. The texts describe the Atlanteans as having developed a highly mechanized, intensely technological society.
Sound familiar?
Yeah. Instead of living in harmony with the Earth's forces, they focused on engineering, controlling, and basically artificially altering their environment to suit their own desires.
And what was the consequence of that, energetically speaking?
Well, because they actively cut themselves off from the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields, they began to experience something brand new to humanity, which was severe psychological stress.
And with that severe psychological stress came brand new, environmentally related diseases. The texts paint a picture of a society that was overworked, hyperstimulated, totally cut off from nature, and suffering from the physical manifestations of all that mental friction.
And here is the core thesis of this whole historical tangent. This is exactly why the Atlanteans had to develop the physical healing techniques we use today.
Oh, because they couldn't just tune in naturally anymore.
Right. The texts argue that the Lemurians could simply attune to the vibration of a flower mentally, just through their innate sensitivity. But the Atlanteans had become so dense and disconnected that they lost that ability.
Wow.
They had to start literally floating blooms on water to physically capture and ingest the essence because they just couldn't tap into it psychically anymore.
They had to bottle the consciousness because they had become entirely deaf to it. That is, I mean, that's a deeply powerful allegory, whether it's literal history or not, because looking at us today, our environment is basically Atlantis.
It really is. We are surrounded by concrete Wi-Fi signals, artificial lighting, constant screen time, and massive psychological stress.
We are completely disconnected from the Earth's natural resonance.
We are. We are experiencing that exact same friction between our ancient biology and our modern technology, and the texts are arguing that we need these vibrational remedies today more than ever, precisely because they act as tools to bridge that gap.
They provide the stable, harmonious frequencies of nature to a body that is essentially drowning in the chaotic frequencies of modern life.
Yes, they are essentially lifelines, helping to return our physical body's energy matrix back to a state that can actually resist the environmental stress we put ourselves under daily.
Well, let's summarize the theoretical framework we explored today because we have covered some incredibly deep ground.
We certainly have.
So according to these texts, your body is not just a meat suit. It is a complex, vibrating energy matrix. When you get sick, the physical symptom is really just the final stop on a train that started with a chaotic imbalance in your subtle bodies or your consciousness.
And to truly heal, you can utilize a highly specific spectrum of nature.
Right. Herbs support your physical vessel while simultaneously issuing a telepathic challenge, asking you to fix the behavioral or spiritual misalignment that caused the illness.
Gems act as powerful radio tuners, using sympathetic resonancy to catch cosmic frequencies and amplify them into your body's internal crystalline structures.
And flower essences, the absolute heavy hitters of the subtle world, bypass the physical body entirely to target the root consciousness and karmic stains of your ailments using pure liquid consciousness.
It represents a complete, holistic pharmacy provided by the earth, but importantly, one that demands you actually participate in your own emotional and spiritual healing rather than just passively swallowing a cure.
It is a beautiful, cohesive philosophy. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final mind-bending detail from the sources to mull over.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
It is, because we've spent this entire time talking about how these remedies affect human beings, but the texts casually drop a detail suggesting that we aren't the only ones relying on these energies.
Yes, this is perhaps one of the most esoteric claims in the entire stack of texts. The authors describe the existence of nature spirits, or what some traditions call divas.
And they describe them not as fairy tale creatures, but as actual, invisible, electromagnetic beings that share our planetary environment, basically operating just slightly outside our normal frequency of time and space.
Right. And the really mind-bending part is their relationship to the remedies we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Just as human beings must constantly draw oxygen from the atmosphere to survive, the texts argue that these electromagnetic beings actively rely on the ambient electromagnetic essences of flowers, plants, and gems to maintain their very existence.
Meaning they essentially feed on the harmonious vibrations of nature.
Exactly.
They eat the vibrations. I mean, that is absolutely wild. So the next time you take a few drops of a flower essence to try and heal a stubborn ailment, consider this perspective from the texts. Are you just tuning your own internal frequency? Or are you simultaneously tapping into a hidden, invisible ecosystem that is breathing and vibrating right alongside you?
It really makes you rethink everything.
It does. Suddenly, that clean binary X-ray we talked about at the start seems awfully small, and the reality you're actually living in seems vastly more complex, vibrant, and deeply connected.
It certainly forces you to look at a simple flower in a completely different light.
It really, really does. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of vibrational healing. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next one.